Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Lenkiewicz Foundation, I'd like to introduce what I'm sure will be an informative and entertaining talk and demonstration by artist Louise Courtnell. I've known Louise for 25 years, actually. In fact, almost to the day, I reckon. When I opened a gallery on the Barbican, and Louise rented a room in the gallery as a studio. In fact, we were reminiscing about this the other day, and she said, "Oh, you let me have that room as a studio?" And I said, "Well, actually, Louise, maybe now I should tell you it wasn't supposed to be for free." But
I was a poor student.
Anyway, it was there that she began to study with Robert Lenkiewicz, and from here on, I think probably she's best telling her own story.
And mobile phones?
And, oh yeah, sorry, mobile phones, please, switched off.
That would be great. Thank you.
Anyway, could I ask you just for Louise?
Miserable mortals, open your eyes. Leonardo. For most of us, seeing is like the way we breathe. We inhale and exhale the visual event, but it rarely goes deep into the lungs. You could say that Robert actually taught me how to see, and I'm a painter today because of him. I needed him as a role model. I didn't know one could just paint at will, one's own subject matter. I had vague ideas of perhaps being an illustrator, but I was lucky enough to meet him. Robert said that painting was a noble thing to do, and the longer I paint, I think I know what he meant by that. It's just that, you know, we have a duty to paint and not make up things. You know, we have to be humble, we have to respect what we see. And Robert taught me all about tone. When I met him fresh from art school, I was a floundering painter. I had always an interest in portraiture, but didn't really know where I was going. I was lucky enough to have a studio with Francis Mallet, and I always liked portraiture, but wasn't really taught painting. So I was more interested in line. But I thought I would try and get known in the city and do some celebrity portraits. I painted Alan Clark, Janet Fuchs, David Owen, I believe. And Francis had the brainwave of asking Robert Lenkiewicz to sit for me. Now, that was a bit of a terrifying idea. I mean, if any of you ever saw Robert, he was 6'3", quite a daunting figure, would patrol around the Barbican and used to eat women for breakfast. So I would know where I was going in his studio. Francis said he would ask Robert for me, to sit for me. It's very funny, when he came back, Francis said, well, the reply was, Robert would only sit for Rembrandt. But would I sit for him? That was a really interesting idea. I thought, well, let's be brave about this and take him up on the offer. Prior to this, I managed to go along to the studio because Francis was arranging an exhibition for Robert. I don't know if anybody of you went to his studio, but it was a marvellous place. It was a bit like going into a TARDIS. You went up a dark staircase, and at the top was a huge room, I'd say about 50 by 60 feet, with paintings filled, crammed from floor to ceiling, big, ambitious paintings with several figures. And it really did blow one's mind. So I was just hungry to look at the pictures, and Francis went off with Robert to discuss business, and I could just go up and look at all the pictures. The one I was really interested in was a huge painting called Death of Education. Robert was clad in a Union Jack, and Karen was holding a dead child, and that was supposed to be a metaphor for how we crush creativity in our schools. It was Robert making a point. But the self-portrait was stunning. It was stunning. And in those days, I was more impressed by details of the hair on the head and the glint in the eyes. So I was just feeding from this, not knowing that Robert was spying on me through a hole in the wall. So whilst I was enjoying all these colours, I heard a voice cry out, "Looking at all the highlights on the end of the noses, are we?" That was quite funny. Anyway, about a week later, I took him up on his offer to sit for him. And it was quite interesting. He'd set up an easel with a canvas about 5 by 4 feet, I suppose, a mere postage stamp, Robert's scale, but big for my sort of scale, but this sort of size. And the unusual thing was it was painted black. I thought that was quite odd. Next to the easel was a large mirror. And it soon transpired that I was going to be sitting on a stool next to his easel, and he wasn't going to be painting me, but the reflection of me in the mirror. Fantastic for a young painter who wanted to learn all about how to paint, because I could see the subject, me in the mirror, and I could watch Robert paint. And he started off with a mud-coloured blob right in the centre of the black canvas, and I just thought, what the hell is he doing? There was no outline, no sketching, no measuring. This is very unusual if one hasn't observed this before, and I just thought, it must be something's gone wrong. He must have forgotten how to do it. And then slowly, well, it took about 2 hours, my face emerged from the black like a magic trick. I just thought, how on earth did he? I want to know how to do this. How did he do it? So that's when my appetite was whetted, you could say. Following on from that, Robert said he would be happy to teach me how to paint, free of charge. He never charged anybody, as long as I did the homework. And thus began my apprenticeship, sort of an apprenticeship. For about 6 months, I painted in black and white. I teach now several students the same method. And he would set up a still life in the studio, a mirror, so I would do self-portraits. I brought along some early works to show you here. And I wanted to share with you my first painting lesson, which was simply a white still life, very similar to the white still life I've set up in front of you. A white still life and a black board, which I had to paint on, which seemed very odd to me. Why paint a white still life on a black board? But I'll explain in a minute why. I had a tin of black emulsion paint, white emulsion paint. And he said, "You'll make 3 mistakes, everyone does." And he went off. He said, "I'll give you 10 minutes. So my youthful arrogance soon disappeared when I was fumbling away and floundering away and got in a complete mess. And he came back and he said, if I were to sing your painting, Louise, it would sound like this. God save our gracious Queen. When it should be, God save our gracious Queen. And I thought, clever, I get it. My painting wasn't in tune. I wonder how many of you here this evening ever thought about a painting being in tune or not. My greys weren't cleanly mixed, so my painting wasn't in tune. The other mistakes I made were I hadn't covered all of my board, and a tricky technical one was I had painted the shape of the objects instead of the shape of the tone. Now I hammer this. Somebody's phone's going off, that's great. I hammer this to my own students, and that's the very hard thing to do, to paint the shape of the tone. Just wondered if anybody here has an idea of what tone might be, because this is the word today that we're going to remember. It's the most important word of my talk, is tone. Anybody have any idea what tone is? Flora? My student? Simplified, Robert said to me, it's just the lights and the darks. The lights, and that's all it is, the lights and the darks. And I'd quite like you just to take a second and look at your neighbour and squint, because when we squint, we see tones more simplified, more simply. And all you are, every single one of you, is just an arrangement of blocks of tone. Very simply. Now, why would Robert suggest painting on a black background, especially when one's doing a white still life? Well, now I'm going to show you a magic trick to explain why. Are you ready for this magic trick? Here we have just a gradation of tones from black to white, okay? I'm going to mix up a mid-grey, just an equal amount of black and white. This is just household emulsion paint, nice and cheap and cheerful. It's great for the students because they don't feel terrified of a pristine white canvas, which is terrifying. Who wants to paint on a white canvas? Not I. Anyway, we have a mid-grey, nice and cleanly mixed. It's got to be in tune. We'll have Mozart, not Stockhausen, I think, today. So, here we have a mid-grey, and I'm going to put a little bit in the middle of every square. Okay, so that one. You can see it all right from where you are. You can try it at home if you like. And you know what? It's like a magic trick because it's the same grey. You know, I've got the same grey. I'm not cheating. And look. Oh my goodness, it's getting darker, isn't it? And look at this. Look at that. Isn't that weird? First of all, it shows us that tones appear differently depending on what's surrounding them. But with paint, we do have a problem because my white paint can never be as light as that light bulb or the sun. Pigment is limited. So what we've got to do is, if you imagine that this is the top note on the piano, and this is the bottom note on the piano, we've got to try and use a chord which is lower down the piano scale in order to paint the world that we see. In order to do that, we work on black. If we worked on white, we would think we were using a dark tone, and we would make it lighter and lighter and lighter. That's not going to help. You can't do that. You need to keep your tones darker, so that's why we work on black. I'll test you later to ask you to remind you. So now, oh, the sun's come out. That's buggered up my still life. That's great. Now I'm going to try and just show you my first painting lesson with Robert. So there's actually a painting in one of Francis's books of Robert's studio with the same objects lit up in the painting. Okay, just go with the flow because the sun's come out. That's changed it a bit. But because I'm a professional, I can handle it. Now, how do we start? Well, Robert's technique was so clear and concise and conceptual. That's the word he always used, conceptual. And what he meant by that was we're starting off with an idea in our heads and we're sticking to it. And to be a good painter, you have to be tenacious. You have to hold on to your thoughts. And the most important piece of advice that Robert ever gave me was, let every mark be a thought and every thought a clear one. That's not easy. You might be thinking about what you're having for tea, but you've got to keep your thoughts very clear and concise. How do we start? Well, we start off with what we describe as the biggest tone first, the biggest shape of tone first. So not the object, but the biggest shape of tone first. So I'm squinting away. The background is quite a darkish, middly dark tone, so that's how I'm going to start off. The board's a little bit silhouetted against the sunlight, but that can't help that. And quite a large brush we start off with, because Robert used to say when you're starting a painting, don't use a brush narrower than your thumbnail. It's a rule of thumb. But it's a good thing to remember, because otherwise you'll get too bogged down with details. So I'm doing the shape of the tone, the biggest shape of tone. And also when you're painting, it's good to feel sort of manly and soldierly. And this is your sword, you see? Bring that down a bit. One of Robert's phrases I really liked was, it's no use trying to paint with just a little bit of hope dangling on the end of your brush. He said you have to paint with knowledge on the end of your brush. So make sure your easel's nice and secure. I was talking with a student of mine who's done very well for himself, Connor. He's now just done a degree in art. And we were talking about how reassuring this way of working is. Because straight away, you're in control of a lot of your board. But you have to be detached about it and not drawn into the details. And also, you know, your palette needs to be an orderly palette. And it's amazing, you know, I've been thinking about it. I've been painting seriously for 25 years now. And I might be feeling a bit rubbish one day or lost. And for this way of working, which is quite controlled, after you've been painting well, you feel fantastic. You feel like you can just do anything. It's like a magic trick. So I'm just grateful. Today is my day for thanking Robert for his teaching. That's what it's very important that I'm doing it. So there we are. Bigger shape of tone first. That's like that. That's like that. Little bit of water. This is a bit like landscape painting when you're in control of nothing. Usually I'm in control of the lights because we don't have Robert, actually, good point. He always blocked out the light when he was painting. And that was to make the light constant, so that you didn't have different tones when the sun came out or not. You've got to make it easy for yourself, because it's so hard, actually. I thought to say that it is hard, what I'm doing. It's hard. Oh, look at it now. It's singing. It's hard, but it's worth it. If it stays like that, I'll have a top C there. So I'm in control. I know what I'm doing. I have to respect the event. Robert used to call, you know, still lives or portraiture, the person, as the event. I've got to respect the still life more than my innocuous daub. Robert used to say his students used to sometimes think their innocuous daubs were more important than the actual object, but they're not. He used to say, nothing haunts the mind more than the mere fact of a thing. And all he meant by that was, it's there, it exists. You know, it's more haunting than your stupid little daub. But we just love our daubs, don't we, Connor? Yes. We do. We get it. I know he was painting one day, he was teaching drawing one day above the post office in town. They did life drawing, and as a lesson in preciousness, after they spent about 2 hours drawing, he put all the drawings in the middle of the room, and they had to destroy them with their feet. As a lesson in not being precious about our mistress pieces. I'm a mistress, so it's my mistress piece, you see. Bigger shape of tone first. Okay, that's that. Different when the sun comes out, but hey, that's what happens. Anybody have any idea where's the very lightest tone? Do you know where the lightest tone is, Alice? Where's the lightest bit over there? Is it the top of the egg? Could be, couldn't it? And from here, if I squint, oh Flora, this is a good time for you to pass around. This is called a Claude glass. We think invented by Claude Lorraine, or Flora would say Claude Lorrain. 17th century landscape painter, and it helps you see tones more easily. It's very useful. And you can see tones more easily from squinting, but if you just look in here, I can check my painting and the still life by looking in here, and it helps you look at tones. Anybody like to have a look in? It's quite... So if I'm squinting now, the tone of this is more or less the same as the tone of this. So I'm forgetting one is the object and one is the table. I'm doing it exactly the same tone. Not easy for the brain, because the brain is thinking, hang on a minute, that's the box and that's the paper. But didn't think about the sun coming out, never mind. Okay. Can I see that tone anywhere else? Yes, it continues down here. And also some of the egg is that tone. So I'm not thinking object and background, I'm simplifying all the time, battling with the sun, changing things. And a slightly lighter area here. But you know, what's great about this way of working is that you can just trace it back to all the great masters. Caravaggio, Titian, Velázquez, they all knew what they were doing with tone. And it's just so liberating, you know, big brush, you're in control. It's very orderly. Leonardo said he thought painting was a more noble art than sculpture, because we've got the problem of trying to make something three-dimensional appear three-dimensional on a two-dimensional surface. It's really hard. Whereas sculptures, they've already got the three dimensions. Oh, easy. And he said sculptures got really messy as well. All messy and sweaty, and I think he used to paint in his best clothes. Okay. Now the next biggest tone, well, when the sun came out, that was quite light. There's a really light bit there. That's a big light tone. So different brush. To keep one's tones clean, we need to have different brushes, one for the darks, one for the lights. Nice clean palette. Don't like that brush, gone a bit stiff. Wow, that really is dramatic. So we've gone something like bong, 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 and now I'm going to go. You see, it's like a musical instrument. Fresh and clean, fresh and clean. Keep referring to the still life because it's more important than my painting. See, tone is the only way you can hope to paint the world as we see it. and also an understanding of tone makes you a good abstract painter. Robert had quite a few students. Diane Nevitt is a very skilled and successful abstract painter, but Lisa Stokes, Jana Travell, Nahum Shoa, but they've all had a real grounding in, that's just come in there, so I can't resist doing that. Ooh, that's lovely. They've all had a grounding in tone, so they all know what they're doing. Aha. A nice dry brush gives you an edge, which is soft, because for shadows, we don't really want dark. We don't really want sharp edges because they're shadows. Okay, the sun is creeping over, so the top of the box is light, but not as light as the other tone. So in a way, it's like I'm juggling. I'm juggling with all these greys, keeping them in the air with the sun changing everything. But I've got to know where my dark tones are and my light tones are. Let every mark be a thought and every thought a clear one, all the time. The box is getting light, hooray! Look at that. Yay! Right, a steady hand is called for. One thing I have to say is that Robert, I never ever saw him measure anything. Most artists would check things with measuring and lining up things, but I mean, he was from another planet, I think. But he just could feel things so well. And he sometimes said imagined he was carving something out of wood just to feel the relationships between things. So black, as I said, helps us mix our tones, but it doesn't help in trying to read what you've just done. So the sooner you get it covered up, the better. See, it's coming. It's funny, isn't it, how putting pigment on a board or a canvas can give meaning to one's life. But it has given meaning to my life for the last 25 years or so, and it's all thanks to Robert. Somebody once said, actually, that the secret to a happy life is problem solving. Gardening, cooking, painting. Now, just need to do some darker tones on the bottom of the egg a minute. That's lovely now. Yummy. See, just twist the wrist, twist the wrist. Okay, a little bit lighter here. That's quite nice. Now let's enjoy those lights on the egg. I can't wait. Right. Okay. This is the juicy bit. Oh, look at that. Isn't it delicious? It's getting there. It's getting three-dimensional. You'll all be seduced by this and having a go at home, I know. Wow. Twist the wrist again. Of course, painting a sphere or an egg shape is more difficult than painting a box because there are gradations in between. So I've got to be a little bit more subtle. But little tiny jumps in tone. Oh, that's lovely. Okay. So I just think it's important for people to know about Robert's teaching. And as you can see, the still lifes, there are 3 in a row there. I had to do the same still life and repeat the relationships by going down in tone. That was a very useful exercise, actually. And the thing is, you never get taught anything like this at art school. It's not taught. It's not known anymore, this way of working. So you've got to come to me if you want to know. I'll tell you. Not taught anymore. I remember watching the Turner Prize one year, and this twit said, and if you want something recklessly old-fashioned like pigment on canvas, we have some paintings over here. And I thought, twit. Because I think it's going to always be important, painting. I mean, it is for me, so I'm biased, but I think paintings like, there's a painting by Rembrandt down there, a portrait, a self-portrait at the age of 63. Paintings can be some of the most moving things, I think, and that's why we need the arts, isn't it, to lift us up. Robert used to say, life is a tragedy, so we need the arts to lift us up. Another dark tone in here. So the reason for doing a white still life is that we don't have the distraction of colour. In a minute I'll be painting my partner Richard, and I've got to ignore his skin tones, his blue jacket, and translate that into tone. That's more difficult. That's why Robert started off his students with a white still life. Mind you, it's still not easy, but at least you don't have the distraction. So everything's changed somewhat with the sun, but despite that, that's a nice dark tone under here. So it's all about the relationship of things. Actually, getting the shape of the shape right is more difficult than tones in a way. Robert was just an expert at that. Just to finish off a little bit more of the background tone. Don't want the black coming through, so I'm just going to cover up the black. I mean, if it wasn't for Robert, I wouldn't have made painting the most important thing in my life. If you're a painter or a poet, you have to just make sure that it comes first. I'm not a wife, I'm not a mother. So I've been able to really focus my attentions on painting for the last quarter of a century. Might just test it a little bit lighter. It's worthwhile taking time to mix the tones cleanly on your palette. And it's funny, isn't it, when you do a still life, it's funny how just the simplest of objects can appear so beautiful. I think so. It gives the object importance. Nice and clean. Better get it right or my father will notice if it's not perfect. I get my talent from my dear papa in the blue. Where's the sun gone now? Oh, it's typical. It's funny, you know, when you're landscape painting, you're in control of nothing. I remember talking to Robert, and I said, I went out landscape painting, the wind blew the easel over, the flies came down on the paint, everything went wrong. He said, all part of it. It's not very clean. Let's just make that a bit lighter. Right, just one more thing. And with landscape painting, as I say, you're not in control of the wind, so you sort of learn things like don't try painting a cloud near you on a windy day. I mean, it's going to be gone in 2 seconds. And the thing is, I forgot to say before that Robert didn't often make things up. As far as I know, on good authority, the painting of the lady with cerebral palsy, with the lady who's short, was painted from a photograph. But that's the only one I know of. But he didn't encourage working from photographs. What's the point? It's a two-dimensional thing, and you're not respecting the event. You're not getting the atmosphere. So if you're doing a landscape and it's a windy day, you'll tell from the brushstrokes it's a windy day because you're trying to get this flipping cloud done quickly. So working from a photograph, you don't get any of that. One more thing. You're not bored yet, are you? That should be right. Just want to get this shape right for my own satisfaction. Sometimes when I'm doing a tricky shape, I sort of appeal to Robert somewhere in the heavens to help me do it. Say, come on, Robert, guide my brush, guide me, guide me. Well, I think that'll do for that still life demonstration.